Before we begin, I want you to pause for a moment and consider something. What if this message didn't find you by accident? What if there are certain moments in life when everything is quietly preparing to change, but you can't see it yet? Most people think their greatest chapter begins when circumstances suddenly improve. They believe that one day success will arrive, opportunities will appear, doors will open, and life will finally make sense. But what if the truth is something far more powerful? What if the best chapter of your life begins long before the evidence appears? What if it begins the moment you stop identifying with the person you've been and start becoming the person you were meant to be? Right now, you may be standing between two versions of yourself. One is the old version, the one shaped by fear, disappointment, doubt, and limitation. The other is the version that already knows its worth, trusts its vision, and walks with quiet certainty toward a greater future. And perhaps this message has found you at the exact moment that transition is taking place. Because every extraordinary chapter begins with an invisible shift, a shift in awareness, a shift in belief, a shift in identity. And if you're hearing these words today, there is a possibility that your life is preparing to move in a direction you've been hoping for, praying for, and imagining for far longer than you realize. So as you listen, don't just hear these words. Allow them to remind you of something you've always known deep within yourself. Your story is not over. The best chapter may be closer than you think, and it may begin sooner than you expect. Every great chapter in life begins with an ending. Before new opportunities appear, before circumstances change, and before your dreams begin to take shape in the physical world, something within you must first come to an end. That ending is not the end of your journey. It is the end of an old identity. Most people spend years trying to create a different life while holding on to the same self concept that produced their current experiences. They want new results, but they continue thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same emotions, and telling themselves the same stories. As a result, life keeps reflecting the identity they have accepted rather than the future they desire. The truth is simple: a new chapter cannot fully begin while the old version of you remains in control. Think about the person you have been identifying as. Perhaps you have seen yourself as someone who struggles, someone who is unlucky, someone who is always waiting for the right opportunity, or someone who never seems to get the breakthrough they deserve. Whether these beliefs were formed through past experiences, disappointments, or repeated failures does not matter. What matters is that every identity carries expectations. If you identify as a person who struggles, you unconsciously expect struggle. If you identify as someone who is overlooked, you begin noticing evidence that supports that belief. The mind naturally seeks experiences that match the story it accepts as true. This is why changing your circumstances without changing your identity often leads to temporary results. The old self eventually recreates the old reality. Before the best chapter of your life can begin, you must become willing to release the story that no longer serves you. This does not mean denying your past or pretending it never happened. It means refusing to let your past define your future. Too many people carry old labels into every new opportunity. They introduce themselves to life through the lens of previous failures. They expect tomorrow to repeat yesterday because they have unconsciously accepted the past as their identity. But the moment you realize that your past is an experience rather than a definition, everything begins to change. You are not your failures. You are not your disappointments. You are not the limitations that once surrounded you. Those were chapters of your story, but they are not the author of your future. The ending of an old identity often feels uncomfortable because it creates a period of uncertainty. You may feel as though you no longer fit into the version of yourself you once knew, yet you have not fully become the person you are choosing to be. This space can feel confusing, but it is actually a sign of growth. Just as a caterpillar cannot remain a caterpillar and become a butterfly at the same time, you cannot remain attached to an old self concept while expecting a completely different life. Transformation requires a willingness to step into the unknown. It requires trusting a new vision of yourself before it feels natural. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is this: who would I be if I no longer carried the limitations of my past? Take a moment to truly consider it. How would you think? How would you speak? How would you carry yourself? How would you approach opportunities, relationships, and challenges? The answers reveal the beginning of your new identity. The future version of you already exists as a possibility within your awareness. Your task is not to create that person from nothing. Your task is to stop holding on to the version of yourself that prevents that person from emerging. As you move forward, remember that every day offers a choice. You can continue rehearsing the old story, or you can begin living from a new one. You can continue identifying with limitation, or you can identify with possibility. You can continue expecting the same outcomes, or you can adopt the mindset of the person who already lives the life you desire. The choice may seem small in a single moment, but repeated daily, it becomes the foundation of an entirely new reality. The best chapter of your life does not begin when the world changes around you. It begins when you stop being the person who needed the old chapter to continue. It begins when you release the identity built on fear, doubt, and limitation and embrace a higher vision of yourself. The moment you do that, you are no longer waiting for a new life to arrive. You are becoming the person capable of living it. And that is where every extraordinary chapter truly begins. One of the most important truths you can understand is that life often reflects the assumptions you consistently accept as true. Whether you realize it or not, you are constantly making assumptions about yourself, other people, and the world around you. You assume what is possible for you. You assume how others see you. You assume whether success is difficult or easy, whether opportunities are abundant or scarce, whether you are worthy of love, respect, and happiness. These assumptions may seem insignificant because they often operate quietly in the background of your mind, but they influence nearly every experience you have. Over time, your dominant assumptions become the lens through which you view reality, and that lens shapes the choices you make, the opportunities you notice, and the results you create. Most people believe that their circumstances create their beliefs. They look at their current situation and conclude that their assumptions are simply logical responses to what they see. If they have struggled financially, they assume money is difficult to obtain. If they have experienced rejection, they assume they are not valued. If they have faced disappointment, they assume future disappointment is inevitable. In this way, the past begins to dictate the future. The mind takes old experiences and turns them into permanent expectations. Without realizing it, people start living according to assumptions they never consciously chose. They stop imagining new possibilities because they become convinced that life can only repeat what has already happened. But what if your assumptions are not fixed? What if they can be changed? The moment you understand that assumptions are choices, everything begins to shift. An assumption is simply an idea that has been accepted often enough to feel true. If an old assumption can be learned, it can also be replaced. This means you are not trapped by the stories you have inherited from the past. You can consciously decide what you will accept as true about yourself moving forward. You can choose to assume that opportunities are available to you. You can choose to assume that you are worthy of success, love, abundance, and fulfillment. At first, these new assumptions may feel unfamiliar, but unfamiliarity is not a sign that they are false. It is often a sign that you are growing beyond the limits of your previous identity. Think about two people facing the exact same situation. One assumes that every challenge contains an opportunity for growth. The other assumes that every challenge is proof that life is against them. Both encounter the same event, yet their experiences are completely different. One responds with confidence and creativity. The other responds with fear and frustration. The difference is not the circumstance itself. The difference is the assumption through which the circumstance is interpreted. This is why your inner beliefs matter so much. They influence not only how you feel, but also how you respond to life, and those responses eventually shape your results. The assumptions you carry also affect the way you see yourself. If you assume that you are capable, you naturally approach opportunities with greater confidence. If you assume that you are valuable, you stop seeking constant validation from others. If you assume that good things are possible for you, you begin expecting positive outcomes rather than preparing for disappointment. These shifts may seem subtle, but they create a powerful ripple effect. A different assumption leads to a different attitude. A different attitude leads to different actions. Different actions lead to different experiences. In this way, a single assumption can quietly transform the direction of your life. One of the most powerful practices you can develop is becoming aware of your dominant assumptions. Listen carefully to your inner conversations. Notice the thoughts you repeat most often. Pay attention to the expectations you carry into everyday situations. Are they empowering you or limiting you? Are they helping you move toward the life you desire or keeping you tied to old patterns? Awareness is the first step toward change. Once you recognize a limiting assumption, you gain the power to replace it with a more empowering one. Remember, your life is not shaped only by what happens to you. It is also shaped by what you consistently believe about what is happening. The assumptions you hold today are quietly influencing the experiences you will have tomorrow. If you want a different future, begin by choosing different assumptions. Assume that you are capable of growth. Assume that new opportunities are finding their way to you. Assume that your best chapter is still ahead. Assume that you are becoming the person you were always meant to be. The best chapter of your life often begins long before any visible evidence appears. It begins the moment you stop allowing old assumptions to control your future and start consciously choosing new ones. When your dominant assumptions change, your perspective changes. When your perspective changes, your actions change. And when your actions change, your life begins to move in a completely new direction. That is the power of a transformed assumption. It does not merely change how you think, it changes how you experience the world. One of the greatest turning points in a person's life comes when they stop demanding proof before they choose to believe. Most people have been conditioned to trust only what they can see, touch, and measure. They look at their current circumstances and use them as the basis for their expectations. If they see limitations, they expect more limitations. If they see obstacles, they expect more obstacles. If they see no evidence that their dreams are possible, they assume those dreams are unrealistic. In this way, they become trapped in a cycle where the visible world controls their inner state. But every meaningful transformation begins when you reverse this pattern. Instead of allowing circumstances to determine your beliefs, you allow your beliefs to shape the way you experience circumstances. Think about every great achievement that has ever existed. Before it became a reality, it existed only as an idea. before a building stood tall against the sky. It was a vision in someone's imagination. Before an invention changed the world, it was an unseen possibility in the mind of its creator. Every accomplishment began with belief before evidence. The visible result came later. Yet many people expect their personal transformation to happen in the opposite order. They tell themselves, "I'll believe in myself when I succeed," or "I'll trust the process when I see results." But waiting for evidence before believing often keeps the evidence from appearing. The mind remains focused on current limitations instead of future possibilities. Believing before you see evidence does not mean ignoring reality or pretending challenges do not exist. It means understanding that your present circumstances are not necessarily a prediction of your future. The conditions you see today are often reflections of past assumptions, past decisions, and past ways of thinking. If you continue using today's circumstances to define tomorrow's possibilities, you limit yourself to repeating the same experiences. True growth begins when you allow yourself to imagine something greater than what is currently visible. It begins when you choose faith over fear and possibility over limitation. Consider a seed planted in the ground. The moment it is placed beneath the soil, there is no visible sign of growth. If someone judged its potential only by what they could see, they might conclude that nothing is happening. Yet beneath the surface, important changes are taking place. Roots are forming. Life is developing. Growth is occurring even though it remains invisible. The same principle applies to your dreams, goals, and personal transformation. Just because you cannot yet see movement does not mean progress is absent. Many of the most important changes happen long before they become visible in the outer world. One reason people struggle with this principle is that they become overly attached to immediate results. They constantly check for signs, search for confirmation, and measure their progress against visible outcomes. When results do not appear quickly, doubt begins to replace confidence. But constant searching for proof often reveals a lack of trust. Imagine planting a seed and digging it up every day to see whether it has started growing. Such impatience would only disrupt the process. In the same way, constantly questioning whether your desired future is possible can interfere with the confidence needed to sustain your new identity. The person who enters the best chapter of their life learns to remain faithful to a vision even when circumstances seem unchanged. They understand that belief is not a reaction to evidence. It is often the cause of evidence. They continue thinking, feeling, and acting in alignment with their chosen future because they trust the process unfolding within them. They do not allow temporary appearances to define permanent conclusions. They understand that today's conditions are only a snapshot of a much larger story still being written. Belief also changes the way you move through life. When you genuinely believe something is possible, your energy shifts. You become more confident in your decisions. You notice opportunities that you previously overlooked. You approach challenges with creativity instead of fear. You remain open to possibilities because your mind is no longer trapped by limitations. This does not happen because the world suddenly becomes different. It happens because your perspective changes, and that new perspective influences every choice you make. The most powerful kind of belief is quiet and steady. It does not need constant validation from the outside world. It does not depend on immediate results. It simply remains loyal to a vision that has already been accepted within. This kind of belief becomes a source of strength during uncertain times. It allows you to continue moving forward even when the path is not fully visible. It reminds you that your future is not determined by what you currently see, but by what you consistently choose to believe. As you move into the next chapter of your life, remember this: the evidence you seek often appears after you have already chosen to believe. Do not wait for circumstances to give you permission to trust your vision. Trust it first. Believe in the possibility before it becomes visible. Remain faithful to the future you have chosen, even when the world has not yet caught up with it. One day the evidence will arrive, and when it does, you will realize that the transformation began long before you could see it. It began the moment you decided to believe before there was proof. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is to stop living as the person you have been and start living as the person you are becoming. Most people spend their lives thinking about the future, hoping for the future, and waiting for the future. They imagine that one day, when their goals are achieved, they will finally become confident, successful, peaceful, or fulfilled. But this way of thinking keeps the future at a distance. It creates a gap between who they are now and who they wish to be. The secret to personal transformation is not merely thinking about your future self. It is learning to think, feel, and act from the perspective of that future self today. The best chapter of your life begins the moment you stop chasing the person you want to become and start embodying that person in the present moment. Take a moment and imagine the version of yourself who already lives the life you desire. This person is not waiting for success, they expect it. They are not searching for confidence, they possess it. They are not hoping to become worthy, they already know their value. Notice how different their mindset is from someone who constantly doubts themselves. Their thoughts are different, their expectations are different, their reactions to challenges are different. Most importantly, they do not see themselves through the lens of past limitations. They see themselves through the lens of possibility. This future version of you already exists as a potential within your awareness. The question is whether you are willing to begin identifying with that version now. Many people unknowingly delay their progress because they continue making decisions from their current circumstances rather than from their desired future. When faced with an opportunity, they ask themselves, what would the person I am today do? But a far more powerful question is, what would the person I want to become do? This simple shift changes everything. The future version of you approaches life differently. They do not allow fear to make every decision. They do not allow doubt to dominate every thought. They act with a level of certainty that comes from already seeing themselves as capable. By asking this question repeatedly throughout the day, you begin aligning your actions with your future identity rather than your past conditioning. Living from your future self does not mean pretending to be someone you are not. It does not mean ignoring responsibilities or denying your current reality. Instead, it means choosing a new perspective. It means refusing to let temporary circumstances define your permanent identity. Imagine someone who dreams of financial freedom. If they continue thinking like a person trapped in scarcity, they may hesitate to invest in themselves, avoid opportunities, and focus only on what they lack. But if they begin thinking from the mindset of someone who already feels abundant, their decisions change. They become more confident, more creative, and more willing to take inspired action. The outer results may take time to appear, but the inner shift happens immediately. The same principle applies to every area of life. A person who sees themselves as healthy begins making choices that support well-being. A person who identifies as confident starts speaking and acting with greater assurance. A person who believes they are worthy of love naturally treats themselves with greater respect. In each case, the transformation begins with identity, not circumstances. The future is created by the person you choose to be today. Every action you take either strengthens your old self-concept or reinforces the new one. The choice is always yours. One of the reasons this practice is so powerful is because your mind responds strongly to what feels familiar. If you repeatedly imagine and embody the future version of yourself, that identity gradually becomes more natural. At first, it may feel uncomfortable because it differs from your habitual way of thinking. But every time you return to that higher version of yourself, you make it more familiar. Over time, what once felt unnatural begins to feel normal. You stop forcing confidence because confidence becomes part of your identity. You stop trying to feel worthy because worthiness becomes your natural state. The future self you once imagined slowly becomes the person you are. There will be moments when your current circumstances seem to contradict the future you are choosing. During those moments, it is tempting to return to old patterns of thinking. It is tempting to let appearances convince you that nothing is changing. But remember that every great transformation begins internally before it becomes visible externally. The future version of you does not abandon their vision because of temporary setbacks. They remain committed to who they are becoming. They understand that circumstances are temporary, but identity is powerful. By remaining faithful to your chosen self concept, you create the conditions necessary for a different experience of life. As you move forward, make it a daily practice to connect with your future self. Ask yourself how they would think, how they would respond, and how they would approach the opportunities before them. Allow those answers to guide your choices. The more often you do this, the more your future begins influencing your present. Eventually, there will be no separation between who you are and who you wish to become. You will realize that the future you were waiting for began the moment you started living from it. And that is when the best chapter of your life truly begins. One of the most important truths to remember during any period of transformation is that every new chapter begins internally before it becomes visible externally. Most people expect change to arrive in a dramatic and obvious way. They look for immediate evidence in their circumstances, relationships, finances, or career. They want to see physical proof that something is happening. But life rarely works that way. The greatest transformations often begin quietly, beneath the surface, long before the world can see them. Just as a seed develops roots underground before it breaks through the soil, your next chapter begins in the unseen depths of your thoughts, assumptions, beliefs, and identity. What appears externally is often the final stage of a process that started internally much earlier. Many people make the mistake of believing that nothing is happening simply because they cannot see results yet. They judge their progress based solely on appearances. If circumstances remain the same, they assume they are standing still. If opportunities have not arrived yet, they conclude that change is not occurring. But invisible progress is still progress. In fact, some of the most important changes happen where the eyes cannot see. The shift from doubt to confidence, from fear to faith, from limitation to possibility, these inner changes may not be immediately visible, but they are laying the foundation for everything that follows. The moment your inner world begins changing, your future begins changing with it. Think about how transformation happens in nature. Before a flower blooms, there is a period of preparation beneath the soil. Before dawn arrives, the sky remains dark. Before a tree grows strong and tall, it spends years developing a root system capable of supporting its growth. Nature never rushes this process because the unseen foundation is essential. The same principle applies to your life. The chapter you are moving toward requires a stronger version of you. It requires new beliefs, new expectations, and a new identity. These changes often develop quietly before they become visible in your external reality. One reason people become discouraged is that they compare their inner journey to external timelines. They ask, why hasn't it happened yet? Or, when will I finally see results? These questions focus attention on what is missing rather than on what is developing. The truth is that your future is not measured solely by external events. It is measured by the person you are becoming. If you are learning to trust yourself more, if you are developing greater confidence, if you are thinking differently than you did a year ago, then transformation is already taking place. Those internal shifts are not signs that change is coming. They are evidence that change has already begun. Your inner world acts like a blueprint for your outer experience. Every assumption you accept, every belief you strengthen, and every new identity you embrace contributes to the reality you eventually encounter. This is why focusing exclusively on external conditions can be misleading. The visible world often reflects old patterns long after you have begun changing internally. There may be a delay between the moment you adopt a new mindset and the moment circumstances begin reflecting it. During this period, patience becomes essential. You must trust that the invisible work you are doing is creating results even when there is no immediate evidence. Imagine someone who has spent years doubting themselves but has recently begun building confidence. Their life may not instantly change overnight. Opportunities may not immediately appear. Yet internally something significant has happened. They no longer see themselves through the same limited lens. They begin speaking differently, making different choices, and responding to challenges with greater certainty. These shifts may seem small, but they are powerful. They create momentum. Over time, that momentum influences actions, decisions, relationships, and opportunities. Eventually, the outer world catches up with the inner transformation that started it all. This is why faith in the unseen is so important. If you constantly demand proof before trusting the process, you may abandon your growth before the results have time to appear. Instead, learn to value internal progress. Celebrate the moments when you choose confidence over fear. Appreciate the times when you respond differently than you would have in the past. Recognize the growth occurring within you. These are signs that your new chapter is already unfolding, even if the physical evidence has not fully arrived. The most beautiful chapters of life often begin long before anyone notices them. They begin with a new thought, a new belief, a new decision, or a new vision of what is possible. They begin when a person stops identifying with their limitations and starts identifying with their potential. The world may not immediately see the change, but the change is real nonetheless. Every day you continue nurturing that inner transformation, you are strengthening the foundation of your future. So if you ever feel discouraged because results seem slow to appear, remember this: the most important work is often invisible. Your next chapter does not begin when circumstances finally change. It begins the moment you change. It begins with a new awareness, a new identity, and a new expectation for your life. Trust the process. Trust the growth taking place within you. Trust the unseen preparation happening beneath the surface. One day, the results will become visible, and when they do, you will realize that your new chapter had already begun long before you could see it. As we come to the end of this message, remember this: the greatest transformations rarely announce themselves. They do not arrive with a warning. They do not send an invitation. They begin quietly. They begin within. One day, you simply realize that the person you used to be no longer exists. The doubts that once controlled you lose their power. The fears that once stopped you no longer feel real. The limitations that once defined your life become nothing more than old memories. And suddenly a new chapter begins, not because luck found you, not because circumstances magically changed, but because you changed. Because you chose a new identity. because you remained faithful to a greater vision of yourself, because you stopped asking the world for permission and started giving yourself permission to become more. So if you're waiting for a sign, let this be your sign. If you're waiting for confirmation, let this be your confirmation. Trust the process unfolding within you. Trust the unseen changes taking place beneath the surface. Trust the version of yourself that is emerging. And most importantly, trust that the life meant for you is not moving away from you. It is moving toward you as you become the person capable of receiving it. Years from now, you may look back on this very moment and realize that this was not just another message. This was the moment you stopped doubting your future and started creating it. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the day before the best chapter of your life began. Thank you for spending these moments with me. If this message resonated with your heart, don't let it end here. Take these ideas with you into your day, into your decisions, and into the story you're creating for yourself. If you found value in this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss future messages designed to inspire growth, confidence, and transformation. And if this message touched you in some way, share it with someone who may need this reminder today. Until next time, keep believing in your vision, keep choosing your highest self, and keep moving forward with faith. Remember, the chapter you're waiting for may be closer than you think. Take care, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next